Well, you're hearing a surprising amount of unanimity on the panel in terms of the direction that we are going in terms of widening inequality. I think the real question is the question that Bill Galston raised: what's the cause? Is the cause primarily social dysfunctions with regard to American families, or is the cause primarily economic, or is there some interaction between the two? I am not a class warrior. I'm a class worrier, W-O-R-R, I-O-R. I worry about what's happening, and I do place a greater stress on the economic explanations. By the way, I want to welcome you as the one member of this panel who teaches here at Berkeley. I want to welcome all of you to Berkeley if you're not here already. I came to Berkeley for the first time in 1968. I drove my little Volkswagen up University Avenue and was immediately caught by the aroma of eucalyptus mixed with tear gas, mixed with marijuana. It was
there we go.
I then spent the next 40 years trying to get back here. Berkeley does have a reputation as being a hotbed of concern about these kinds of social issues, but obviously it's not the only place, and the United States is not the only place where the divergence in income and wealth, and I should add political power, is also happening. You see the same kind of pattern happening in most nations. So I think that we need to probe a little bit deeper as to the origins. I also want to go back in history. It's not just the post-Second World War where things get interesting. In fact, if you look at the United States and many other countries in the years leading up to the great crash of 1929, you see something that parallels what we have experienced here in the United States. And that is that in 2 years in the past century, we have had a peak, that is, a peak of the top 1% earning the largest percentage of total income at any other point in time. Those 2 years were 1928 and 2007. In both those years, we had the top 1% earning over 23.5% of total income. And in the years preceding those peak years of 1928 and 2007, we experienced a middle class whose wages were basically going nowhere. The median income was fairly stagnant. You also had economic growth, but most of the gains of growth and productivity improvements went to the very top. The middle class, to maintain their status and to maintain their quality of life, they borrowed, and they borrowed heavily. And those two great debt bubbles, both in a sense housing bubbles, but not nearly the same constitution and same composition of debt, they both exploded. They exploded in 1929, and they exploded in 2008. I think that we can see in both periods that inequality widened dramatically, and that widening inequality had not only economic devastating results in terms of the Great Depression and the Great Recession, but also had results in terms of political divisiveness. Many of my colleagues here at Berkeley and other places have been studying political divisiveness, the extent to which the parties are divided on many issues, and you see a similar pattern tracking this widening inequality. In the 1920s, we had a peak of political divisiveness, just as we now seem to have a peak of political divisiveness. We also saw in both eras an extraordinary amount of money coming into politics. Again, I think very closely aligned with the concentration of income and wealth at the very top. Social factors undoubtedly are important here, but the reason I am stressing the economic is that they are inevitably a large part of the picture. And when we get to solutions, if we are only or primarily looking at social dynamics, it's much harder to conjure up solutions to social dynamics. Much easier to say, well, the poor and the lower middle class ought to change their lifestyles. The rich ought to be better models for the rest of the country. There's not that much we can do. But if we focus on the economic, actually there is a world that we can do. If we see that the great change, as Bill Galston said, in recent years happened between 1978 and 1983. That was the great U-turn, when we went from a widespread prosperity in which the gains from economic growth were widely shared in this country to widening divergence when the gains from growth went almost entirely to the very top. We can look at that period and ask ourselves what specifically happened. And what happened then, and what happened again in the 1920s for slightly different reasons, what happened to us between 1978 and 1983 was two things. One word that has gone directly from obscurity to meaningless without any intervening period of coherence, and that is globalization. The second has to do with tremendous technological change and a lot of job displacement. And what I hope we get to is a discussion of why these two phenomena have not only changed the relationship between the economy and who gets what, but also threatened our social fabric in very, very profound ways.